This week on RSBANDB Update, do Jagex's new fan policies mean they can sue you for fanfic? The answer is complicated. We also discuss the new Treasure Hunter Assassin promo, some listener questions, and more. This is RSBANDB Update, episode 893, recorded Thursday, July 28th, 2022. Copyrights and Copywrongs. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for another episode of RSBANDB Update. This week, of course, in RuneScape, it's Patch Week, but nonetheless, we have a bit of interesting news to discuss. Tanis is under the weather again. Thaxi is here filling in. Welcome back.
Hello, good to be back.
And also, we have a very important guest on the show. Some of you might have noticed last week, Jagex put out a new policy on regulating fan content creation works, and we got somebody here who you've heard on the podcast before, a specific Halloween episode. We won't dive too much into what we talked about there because the both of us have bad memories about that, but I'd like to welcome back to the podcast. Yeah, you know where we're going with that. I'd like to welcome back to the podcast Chaos Elemental, a fan fiction writer who has lots of questions and ways that we need to dive into what this document means for fan content creation going forward. Welcome aboard.
Thanks, Shane. It's great to be back on the show, and I do indeed have a lot of questions, and unfortunately, education and copyright law. So my degree is of some use, shockingly.
And that's I reached out to you, I think it was at the tail end of last week, to start talking about this, because I knew based on the way the document looked that it looked like writers were going to have a big reaction to this, because it seems to be targeting that part of the content creation scheme in a different way than the other one. So I thought, let's reach out to you and see what you have to say on that. So we're going to go through most of what the ramifications are on the fan content creation policy, with a special emphasis on what it means for writers and artists in particular. So that's going to be later on in the show, but we're going to start off with Jagex taking away one of the new toys for merchanters. And if you want to follow along, we have full show notes available at update.show. I am Shane12088 in game. You can find Thaxi at Thaxi. And Chaos, what's your RSN currently?
My current RSN is Lady_Terrell, but you're much better off DMing me over Discord or poking me over Twitter at Chaos_Elemental.
Alrighty, sounds good. And we're going to start off with the Merchanter's toy being taken away. And of course, what we're talking about is the Assassin Walk override that was something that was traded specifically above Merchers before, and it was pretty much relegated to max GE cash at the time. And lo and behold, they surprise everybody this week with a new Treasure Hunter promotion talking specifically about the Assassin reward set, including the walk animation. That's effectively a carbon copy Naruto run. Let's just be honest with that. That's what that is. And the Assassin outfit as well. And they also highlight that there's a chance to get 5 million GP from this promotion if you follow the contracts that you're given on Treasure Hunter. And I just want to say, and I just want to open this up, and normally we don't talk too much about Treasure Hunter promotions here because they are what they are, right? It's a part of RuneScape. It's something that you have to accept if you play RS3, and it's another revenue stream for Jagex. But I think this is interesting in two ways. First, it takes these away as one of the toys that merchanters can use, and second, it's a cosmetic that you can effectively put money into on Treasure Hunter if you're interested in attaining them. And I don't know about the both of you, how you feel about Treasure Hunter and cosmetics in general.
I mean, my appreciation, as you've noted within the past few weeks even on the show, is that Treasure Hunter is generally balanced around primarily giving cosmetic benefits, or in some cases, relatively large chunks of XP, but not terribly frequently. So from that aspect, I don't mind them doing, especially cosmetic stuff. I think is great, especially if it's cosmetics that people want. I think the issue with these is that they were specifically in the way that I would frame this in my head is that it's the walk tokens, and the same thing with the zombie walk that was we had last October, was that they're merged in a way that is merchers are playing with them and elevating the value above what the average player could access or use. So it's pulling content away from people that could use it. And there's this type of merching where people are like, I'm going to hold on to this because I think it will rise in value because people will want it. And that seems healthy merchanting to me, right? That is all things supply and demand at its best. This is very much, I'm going to take all of them, and then the value is going to go up because they're going to be obnoxious, and either other merchants are going to want them or other players are going to want them until it becomes prohibitively expensive for players.
Yeah, you're 100%.
It's the same thing that's happened with party hats, right?
Yep.
And so I am all in favor of them saying, yeah, this isn't a thing we promised you would never come back. It's back.
And the price has already gone down a bit. I checked the price earlier. And caveat, of course, this is running off of the City bot checker, so it's not always going to be the most up to date price that you're going to see on the exchange. But the lowest when it first came back online was about 700 mil, and previously we were talking about max cash before. The most recent trade, number of hours ago at this point, was 1.1. So we'll see where these all land. But the point is that there's also
Mil or bill.
Bill, sorry, did I say mil?
No, you just didn't specify.
Okay, sure. Fair enough. Chaos, you have any thoughts on assassin walk overrides or how we're seeing these cosmetics used in the past and now?
Somebody who's a bit of a history buff and who is well aware of the Dutch tulip crash, as well as the ornamental garden cone shell crash after a glut of them was discovered on the north coast of Australia. If you play that kind of game, I think you should be prepared to face a glut of seashells, so to speak. It's just as he said, it was never indicated that it wouldn't come back.
Fair enough.
I mean, it's been a rough market all around, on the crypto market, on the override market, on the NFT market.
Oh, God.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. And, when you look at this, you could very much say that you're entirely right. You invest in this, you can expect it to go up, you can expect it to go down, and that's just going to be the way the ball bounces at the end of the day. And this promo is running for a week, so it should have a significant dent on that and allow anybody who wants to get one, either through spending oddments, spending real-world money, bonds, or even just purchasing it on the G, they should have a chance to do that. So I think that accomplishes what needed to be done with this. And I don't know if I've been under a rock this week or if there hasn't been blowback on this, but I feel like the amount of complaining we typically see with new Treasure Hunter promos, it was in a smaller quantity this week, I think.
I think pretty much the majority of the player base is happy to see someone sticking it to those, let's call them abusive merchers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the biggest takeaway from it. There's nothing in this otherwise that's truly overpowered. It's just, hey, cosmetics.
Yeah, exactly.
All the power to them.
Yeah. In other Treasure Hunter news this week, they upped by a factor of 5 the chance to receive ultra rare chests. So meaning rather than the 5,000 keys that you would have had to have a 5% chance of seeing an ultra rare, that's down to only about 1,000 now. For your box of Superior Knowledge Bombs, Death Touch Darts, or Protean or Dummy processors, to highlight that. And for anybody wondering, the Assassin Walk Override has a Treasure Hunter drop chance of 0.335%, which means that you have to use about 30 keys to have a 10% chance of getting the Walk Override, while using 100 keys gives you a 30% chance of getting the Walk Override. So if anybody really...
Don't check that math.
No, don't check that math. Those are just rough estimates. So, but I think at the end of the day, people who are going to have wanted these are going to have a good chance at getting them now, either through the market or through Treasure Hunter itself. And I think it's a win-win for the community on that. So
for sure.
I'm content to step away from that into our patch notes for the week. So, and with that, they are very general patch notes, just general bug fixes. We're going to go through them relatively quickly here. Starting off, fixed an issue that meant that players needed 100 solo and 100 group kills for Zamorak to unlock the insane final boss, rather than the 100 combined kills. Yeah, that would have been rough if you would have had to get the 200 combined, 100 solo and 100 group for that. They also fixed an issue preventing Zamorak's attacks from reaching the player in Phase 7 if they stood next to the Infernus portal. That sounds like a bit of a creative bug to prevent yourself from getting hit, though. I don't know necessarily.
Do you smell that, Shane? Do you smell that? That is some absolutely fragrant cheese.
Okay, that's where I was going with that. I wasn't sure if it would be usable.
I mean, bordering on some serious abuse. I think the portal is the far end from Zamorak, so I don't think you could attack him. So I don't know that you could. I don't know how abusable that is, but
I suppose if you sit there and heal.
Well, or if you just go back that way while he's slamming, if his slams do not require your presence, if he just does them based on time that you're in there, if he just has a rotation he does on his own.
I got another thing you could have done with this that would have not necessarily been a true bug abuse. You could have used this to prevent your attack from getting hit to have your kill times be longer than my 27-minute kill time, which was posted on Reddit again today.
See, but the issue with that is that you couldn't. This is only Phase 7, and Shane, your kill time is 0%.
Right, so I didn't have a Phase 7
kill time. Yeah, Phase 7 people cannot. Their kill times will automatically be higher on the leaderboard than you. You're safe on that front. My bigger concern with this is actually selling leeches. I think if you had a 4-man group who was really good, you could carry a 5th man and have them hide by the portal and get kill credit without having to do the kill.
I never thought of that.
Yes. So, anyways, good fix.
Do people still buy leeches?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
All right. Invention and archaeology are now correctly restored after fights with certain stat-reducing bosses in the Dominion Tower. I guess that wasn't accounted for when those two new, in air quotes, skills were added compared to Dominion Tower.
I mean, who would go to the Dominion Tower and go, yes, I'll hit up Harrod Ed after this. Oh boy. Oh no, I can't excavate it. Why? Oh no, my
surprise.
Oh, Dominion Tower. Yay. Anyways. Fixed an issue where some versions of the augmented Dark Sliver of Lang had different costs on death. These are, of course, referring to dyed variants having different prices than the non-dyed variants, which was throwing a wrench in the death cost system.
Yeah, and I don't know that this says if they changed the base version to have a fixed cost, or if they unfixed the cost of the dyed versions, or how they did that math. But
consistency is important at the end of the day.
We'll take it.
Yeah.
It's a mess, but
all variants of the Pontifex rings can now be used to pass Pontifex barriers. I'm guessing that the upgraded ones from the Elder God Wars line could not have been used with that. So
no, they were a different item. I understand why they weren't coded in, but cool.
Yep.
Quality of life. I'm sure there's going to be some new players who are getting into archaeology now who will appreciate that because
and have done one of the quests. So
right,
yeah,
yep.
Fixed an issue where spiritual mages were not affected by aggression potions while the player was more than 2 tiles away from the NPC.
Some particular person has been annoyed by this bug for about 8 years, and nobody else has noticed it exists.
Right.
And that one person finally got through.
To you. And you're wasting not archaeology potion, you're wasting aggression potion doses on that, and we know those are expensive.
Hey, power to the people.
I mean, I think the true issue is that if you wanted dragon boots on an Iron Man, the mages, I believe, are the only ones that drop the boots.
Yes.
So you'd end up aggroing a whole bunch of other mobs, but not the mobs you were trying to aggro, which is funny, but not helpful.
Right. And we know funny bugs that target one part of the population are never a good bug to let persist. Well, any bug's not good to persist, but you know what I mean.
Gotta get that power armor.
Targeting certain parts of the population. Dragon fruit items are now correctly transferred to the bank when using the sign of the porter. Not much else to say there. Fixed an issue where players could collect multiple ectoplasmators without checking it off in the Slayer log. Picking up the next ectoplasmator drop you receive will check it off. That's interesting.
That's nice. I think that's the check for also allowing you to reclaim it from Diango.
Oh, okay.
Which I believe has annoyed a couple of people I've known in the past. So good job.
Right, that's the one that started off as a Halloween event item and is the Ash version of the Bone Crusher, right?
Right. It got the upgraded version. Yeah, they made it a more functional thing and put it on drop tables. Yep.
All right. And then we go back over a year now for our last two patch notes. Fixed an issue that was causing Hellweir to stop attacking when placed north during the Battle of the Monolith. And fixed an issue that could cause the Tsar to become immortal during the Battle of the Monolith. Okay. That would have been bad if that was the case. But in any case, folks, there's your patch notes for the week. It's time now to move on to the fan content policy discussion. And this was first published on July 19th. And I had a quick look at this on my end, and I'll just say before you guys get into what your opinions are on this, my initial thing that I was looking through this for was to see what it would mean for podcasters. And my only interpretation from this and the way that it affects us is that going forward, if we use content, i.e. video or imagery from the game, that means we need to include a disclaimer on the video or wherever it might be that the images are therein from RuneScape and aren't owned by us and are wholly owned by Jagex, which we haven't been doing, but we should probably start doing with this. So where do we want to start with this? Chaos, I guess I'll just get your quick 30-second opening on this and your background aside from being a fan fiction writer. You mentioned copyright law in the beginning, but just give us a quick 30-second.
Sure thing. So I'm going to supply a disclaimer before the disclaimer. I am not a lawyer. I am not a paralegal. I do have a background in education in copyright law. I studied copyright law, First Amendment law, all that jazz in college, and I am also just a nerd who likes to keep her pulse on where copyright law is going. And a lot of this stuff is still up in the air, especially in terms of creative content and just how the internet has evolved over the past few decades. So some of this is going to be speculation. Please do not use this as a basis for a legal case, etc. Go and actually talk to a lawyer, and there are resources for that. Secondly, do note that all of this that is in the policy is based in UK law, which is not my natural forte, but I have studied it a little bit, and it does overlap a fair bit with US law. All right, so my background. As Shane mentioned, I am a fan fiction writer. I'm a pretty prolific fan fiction writer. Specifically, I have written over 400,000 words of RuneScape fan fiction. All of it is on Archive of Our Own. I've written a pretty wide variety of fic content. My most notable work is A Hard Fall, which is 238,000 words. I wrote that and published that back in 2019 and 2020. I actually got nominated for a Golden Gnome for it. I know people at Jagex have read it. So I've been all over the place with this, and I'm still really involved in the art and the fic community. So just to kind of start off, I think we should dig into the policy in and of itself and see what it highlights.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. Go ahead.
Firstly,
Jagex, if you look at Section 3, it says that it claims to grant basically a license to anybody who wants to create derivative work, aka fan works, videos, podcasts, all that jazz, anything based on its intellectual property, its IP. So it's basically saying, we're letting you do this, but it has to be under these conditions. So Section 2 is really interesting. And this is going into what the policy really covers and what Jagex is claiming that this policy and all of the restrictions cover for it. And it's really broad.
Right.
Yeah, that's the first thing that I caught from this is it's anything that touches the RuneScape IP is what they wanted to cover with this. And it's getting into, I think, one of the bigger questions that we're going to get through to this, and people are wondering is, why now? But we'll answer that near the end here as we get through this. What raised your eyebrow in the initial breadth of what it covers?
I mean, the start of this, the thing that caught my eye, and I think, Chaos, you mentioned the same thing, is that in kind of this second section of these rules, it lays out examples of what could be Jagex property. Specifically, I'm imagining that they created these examples saying, hey, you've used this before out there, content creators of the world. Just a heads up that this is something that is now being looked at. And that includes gameplay footage of adventures within the game. And they're not specifying here whether that's things that they've coded into the game, like quests, or if that's challenges that a person has set themselves and led on their own self-made adventure. So I don't know what that covers necessarily. But even things like our player avatar, things that, like representations of the in-game environment. So if you were to paint a landscape of the world looking down from Ice Mountain on the free-to-play worlds, does that fall under this category? I think it does. Right?
Or if you were to remake the Legends Guild.
Haha, indeed. Although I think that one's probably been stamped of approval at this point, given that they posted it themselves. But, right, those kind of things. And obviously their music, that one makes sense within reason, and they go into that later. But yes, interesting, very broad, but especially things that in the past could have been considered player created, like representation of like fishing at, down at Remington or elsewhere, or if your your player avatar, that's something that you have designed and created, and that is very central to a lot of people's views on the game, that you have to be careful with how you use that now.
It's really broad. They do say that your player avatar, and I suppose this can be construed as, say you take a screenshot of your player avatar, and they do want to apply the restrictions to it and say, you can't just slap a screenshot of your character and try and monetize it. But coming from the art community, I can tell you a lot of people make their player avatar their own. They make their own character, they depict them, they draw them. Sometimes they sell merchandise involving them. They'll write stories with their player avatar in them. Sometimes they'll use their player avatar as kind of a stand-in for other works. I think this kind of is the tip of the iceberg of the main thesis of this whole thing, which is a lot of this policy is really broad. It's kind of vague, and I think it covers a little bit too much. Or not covers, I think it restricts a little bit too much because they don't have the wording down.
Yeah.
And I...
Go ahead.
I want to add another kind of disclaimer. When I say Jagex here, I mean Jagex, the executives, the Jagex brass. I don't mean the individual Jagex mods.
Of course, like the corporation, let's just say.
Yes.
Like the corporate entity.
I'll get in... Yeah, so the corporate entity of Jagex. I don't mean, again, the RuneScape mods, the OSRS team, so on and so forth. They're a creative bunch. A lot of them have been very baffled by these policies, which I'll also get into later. So this is mainly at whoever drafted this policy, whoever has put in the legal language of this, and again, the executives.
Yeah, and I just want to pull on two threads from this one, in particular gameplay footage, which could affect us. That's one. But the other one that's interesting with this is the music found within our games. Because if you go to any content creator in the past, we have been told that you can stream RuneScape and you can play the RuneScape music on your stream. You can even use it freely in your YouTube videos with that. So then you get into this position where if you're using gameplay footage and the music, if you make something that's the legal team is going to take issue with at some point, is that going to be effectively reversed on that? And
to be fair, the music content is laid out in significantly greater detail in terms of what you can and cannot use farther down in this documented section 4.
And I wanted to also highlight the one YouTube channel, I think it's Jan's YouTube channel, that has all the RuneScape music on it. That's an excellent repository for Jagex music, and I think, and once again, we're not legal experts here, I think looking into what the policy covers in terms of music and video, I think that channel would be in violation from it. But I hope that's not the case, and I hope nothing would ever happen to that channel. So that's just where all this comes in, that there's so many questions about this.
Right. No, that's fair.
All right. Where do we want to go next, Chaos? You have any more things you want to pull on from Section 2, or should we dive into the fan fiction space?
Oh boy. I think we should just jump over to Section 4 into the fan fiction space, if only for the sake of introduction. And this has kind of been the big money question, at least with me and a lot of other artists and creators in the space. I'm not going to, read it for you. I could assume everybody following along is familiar with this. But it basically calls for fics over 15,000 words to be run by us being Jagex, and basically saying, you need to ask us permission for fics over 15,000 words. And there's a lot to unpack there. There's so much to unpack there in terms of that, in terms of how arbitrary and unenforceable and nonsensical this is. And I may be a little biased considering that I have violated that policy with my word count at least 27 times. I'm going to wake up and find 27 lawsuits in my mailbox tomorrow. But I think that is, again, pretty egregious. And again, nonsensical, non-enforceable.
Yeah.
So on and so forth. That's its own kettle of fish.
For people who don't read the RuneScape fan fictions, aren't necessarily aware of in terms of what 15,000 words is volume-wise, where does that stack up in terms of book, novel space, etc.?
So, and again, I'm going to touch on this a little bit later. 15K is such an arbitrary number. So a novella, for example, is a really loose definition. There is not some big constitution out there among publishers saying a novella is X number of words. A novella is generally anywhere from 10K to 40K words. A novel is a little bit more solid, partly because of National Novel Writing Month, which defines a novel as 50,000 words. 15K is not anywhere in that ballpark at all. And there's also just not really any sort of official tie to word count in terms of copyright violation. There's no precedent. There's no real precedent when it comes to word count alone.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess go ahead.
It's just really weird that they're applying this very unilaterally to fan fiction. They're not saying with art, you can only have 2 copyrighted characters in there, or you can only spend 5 hours on your art, or you can only have art that is 9 by 9 inches, which would also be pretty ridiculous. But that just goes to show how nutty this is.
Yeah.
And again, we're going to go more into the meat of that once we go through the policy as a whole, but it doesn't make any sense. I don't know why they included it. I actually do have an inkling of why they included it. But
all right. That'll be interesting to hear.
Yes.
I also want to point out that in Section 4.3, they very explicitly state that you can't create NFTs using Jagex property. So there's that too, as well, which I don't think anybody would have questioned that to begin with. But with that, let's move on to Section 5. We'll talk a lot more about the fanfiction policy of that going forward and just what all that means. But Section 5 comes down to merchants, and I feel like we see this more on the old school community side of what we have with RS than what we have with RS3, but it's still an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, they make a couple points here, which I think, which do oppose a lot of the things, right? The way that the things that I've seen that violate this, right, is firstly just the policy in general, right? You can't sell more than 100 items of anything you've made without Jagex permission. You have to state when you post sales for anything how many of an item you're going to have. I guess probably for them to allow them to police this. And you can't do open-ended, so unlimited pre-orders, and you can't do things that are like just print on demand, right? So I've seen a lot of like the old school content creators, right, use They do hype pieces for their series, for their videos. They do movie posters. They do plushies. They, various things, right? Of their characters or other stuff that is like distinctly put out in these rules. And some of them use literal in-game models, some which have been re-rendered, some not. And like, again, open-ended just sales on websites in various places. And so like all of those things will now have to stop. And I kind of think that that's like in part some like hype that sells the game, that somebody who comes over to your house and sees a blanket with Gillinor Games in giant letters on it, right? And you see
Yep.
that like that's, hey, what is this? Where does it come from? And it seems like just easy publicity for the game. And of course, Jagex is not necessarily getting a cut from any of that. And the creators who are doing that probably have ways to reach out to Jagex and say, hey, do you want to take 10% of this or whatever, if that's what it needs, or do I just have permission to sell it as hype merch, as opposed to, other things. And so that this part of the can I sell the stuff I make is interesting as a decision to me in terms of like just visibility for the game and limitation on creators in terms of promoting themselves.
Yeah, but could it be that if you sell something and you just start with 100 units and it takes off, you contact Jagex and they say, sure, go for it. We'll just, market it for you. This is actually an interesting thing. We'll add it to the official store. That could be one way it goes. But on the other hand, there's an entirely different world where, once again, the Jagex corporate entity could just shut this down entirely. So,
right.
And
yeah,
this is, for me, something that I feel it could be stifling, because I think Angelscapes started out in this very similar manner of selling the keychains and such and the little pieces on their own, and then once the market built up behind it, now they're just sold on the official RuneScape store, and they're wonderful pieces. I have a couple of them myself, and it's all about, I think, fostering that creativity at that point if we're going to be looking into it from that perspective. So
I think this really speaks into the philosophy, and we're going to go over this in the next section, of how Jagex views its creators as possible competition. Because it's one thing to say, please don't take just a rip off of one of our products and sell it on Redbubble. If it's just a lazy screenshot, a lazy rip of a licensed map that they're selling on Redbubble for $10, that's one thing. They're robbing the competition. But is it truly competition if Jagex, say, tells Jimmy, no, you can't do this promotional plate poster for buy release? Is it competition if they say, Swampleptics, no, you can't do this promotional run of posters for the finale of Swampleptics?
And the interesting thing,
if Jagex isn't going to do that in the first place, they're not competing with anything.
Right. And it comes back to what they were saying about kind of what falls under Jagex property, right? And looking at those displayed posters, since you mentioned them, right? Like, you've got things like the buy release poster, which is almost directly like models from in-game on the Lumbridge Bridge with like very recognizable RuneScape symbols in the background, versus something like, again, I keep bringing this up as an example, I guess, Gillinor Games, where the poster for that is the faces of 12 content creators in a very realistic human style, and some of them are based around the actual like bone structure of the creator in question and wherever they have their face, but it's like with the facial hair, for example, that the RuneScape character has. And some of the old school content creators, notably, like, I think Jimmy put out something actually today or yesterday where he directly mentioned, haha, I'm putting my character's face in the video because he looks like me. This is not a reference to Jay. This is a reference to my face.
Go. Yeah.
And he specifically has the mustache that his character, like, so it's a question of like, where, like, that line is very blurry to me. But yeah. And
it just raises all these interesting questions. Like, we're, I think, 10 to 12 minutes into this segment so far, maybe a bit more. And I don't think we've answered anything yet, and we're probably just confusing people. And we're going to try and tie some of this all together as we get through it. But I am glad we're doing this because we're showing to the listener base what content creators to a degree have been looking at for the past week and a bit on this. I like where we have to go next, but before that, I just want to thank our Patreon supporters for this episode and everything they enable us to do. So starting off this week, I'd like to thank Amos Reed, Andrew C., Arvids L., Big Huge Rat, Bryflex, Chunk the Monk, Diana, Dominic F., Drama Free, Duramax, L.O. Matey, Flaws a Man, Free Milk, Jade Gizmo, Jason S., Jeebus, Jesse W., Ling01, Lucky Ducky, Mohan V., Nate the Great, Nick G., OTR Gamer, Patty the Architect, Pernasius, Ren Hawk, Ricky A., Samuel FL, Skiotan, Seth W., Stabib, Tabby, The Naked Captain, Tom V., and Zant. Thank you, everybody, for your support. It truly means the world to us. If you want to know more about what we offer for Patreon, check us out at patreon.com/RSBNB. We offer all sorts of tiers starting for as little as $1 a month. The $1 a month tier gets you access to the entire back catalog of monthly bits, including monthly bits like our Dailyscape tier list from the start of the year, our talk about the CompCape rework, the tier list for PVM bosses, and upcoming this month at the start of August will be a look at where achievements stand in 2022 and whether or not achievement chasing is a viable gameplay strategy in RuneScape. So if that sounds interesting to you, or you just want to hear any of those, you can gain access to that entire back catalog starting for as little as $1 a month. We also do have a VIP tier for $3 a month where you'll get a special mention on the podcast at the start of the month and access to a chat channel and high-quality stereo versions of the show. And we do have an insider tier where you'll receive a shout-out on the podcast each and every week and gain access to the outtakes we use to make the clip show at the end of the year. So if any of this sounds interesting to you, check us out at patreon.com/RSBNB. It means the world to us. Thanks so much, everybody. And there is good authority that Patreon supporters will be treated to my bank roasting at the start, or not, at some point in August. We'll be doing that. I think sometime in the first 2 weeks we'll have some people, mainly Youth Taxi and Earth, roasting my bank.
Very excited.
And once again, this started off as just we were testing some stuff for the video episodes, and they see my bank, and that stole the show, of course. So that's why we're going to offer that up. And Earth wants that delivered uncensored, so you can only imagine what he's thinking.
I mean, Reed sees your bank and says, hold on, Shane, hold on, and immediately stops all productive conversation to make sure that this happens. And so, again, I think he's very excited.
And we saw this on video. He brought his iPad very close to his face, and you could just see his eyebrows perking up about trying to understand what was going on.
Squinting at the very small image we were seeing of your bank, yes. Oof.
It's like Marie Kondo, but RuneScape style, so unbelievably toxic.
Oh, no.
I don't know what that is. Is that bad?
That's it's the Netflix show where the lady comes into the house and helps you clean up your stuff, and she says, "Does this one spark joy? No, then throw it away. Does your bank spark joy?"
Hey, that's what the search features. That's what the search features for.
Oh, Jesus. Your bank isn't unorganized. It's just got a lot of junk in it.
In any case, back to copyright.
So, hopping over to Section 6, specifically Section 6.1.4. God, I feel like I'm at a town council meeting going over the bylaws.
Well, I mean, at least we're going to add some lividity to it, right?
Yeah. So, Section 6 is really interesting because it specifically has a clause about competing with Jagex. It says you can't create content that would or could compete with any existing products that Jagex has created. And when you think about the general definition of this typically means taking away some form of revenue stream from Jagex in a tangible way. So if you were to completely rip the game of RuneScape off and post a version that was in black and white called Toonscape and start pulling people into that, that would be using Jagex IP to compete directly with Jagex. You know,
can we turn this idea on its head? And I don't know if you want to go there right now or if you want to go there after, but turning this on its head, 117 for old school.
That's a topic we'll get into later.
Okay.
And there is some interesting kind of legal backing with that, legal precedent set with that. But it would basically be a product that would completely draw away the audience from a given Jagex product and rob them of revenue. And again, the definition for competition among these rules and among individual arbitration, from what I've been speaking with the mods about, which I'll also get into later, seems to be really foggy, which is interesting, and it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing that they don't have a good idea of what competition is, because depending on how much experience you have in the fandom and how you actually perceive what fanfic does, you can take this really far. So it's down there in writing, fine. Jagex can say no competing content, but I think they do need to establish what competition is a little bit more solidly.
Yeah, because, you could say that if Jagex started posting their weekly patch notes series again like they used to, and we did that for a while as well, if we were doing that as well, would that be competing with Jagex? Because in theory, if their channel's monetized and we're doing a Patreon at the end of ours, is that competition? So once again, very, very gray in general, not just for writers and artists, but for people in general, I feel as well. Anybody who's monetized in any way, either through Patreon or through advertisements. So
you mentioned Angelscapes earlier. If somebody else wanted to make keychains, is that direct competition with Jagex then? Because Jagex is selling their product. Is there an unintentional, exclusivity clause in this?
Right. And
very open.
Right. And when it comes to exclusivity, I can go with, we can go back to the launch of Archaeology and the promotional materials that were sent out for that, in terms of, I know it was a limited run that was created of the Codex and the capes, but if the person who made the Codex and the capes wanted to, in effect, sell some more of those, where would they stand with this content policy? That same sort of thing. And the questions just go on and on and on. And I have a question. Is our next section here perhaps one of the more clear ones when it comes to offensive content?
Yeah, surprisingly so, and a little, not a little, really overarching. So it says specifically, you can't use Jagex property to create, note the word create there, any content that is pornographic, lewd, obscene, vulgar, discriminatory, illegal, or otherwise objectionable. And whether your content is objectionable is entirely at Jagex's discretion. This is the one that is arousing a lot of ire among the artists.
Arousing, you say?
All right, you got me there.
Sorry, go on.
This conflict is going to come to a climax.
Oh my.
But they say specifically that Jagex property cannot be used to create, which again is that language there, which gives them so much leeway. They are literally saying, you can't make lewds with our content, and if we're going by the language in there, that includes NPCs, that includes the player avatar. So, I know a lot of not safe for work artists, and they've been laughing about it. Of course, it's been the source of a lot of memeing on Reddit, on Discord, on Twitter. But again, it's such a wide umbrella. And somebody did actually ask one of the CS mods about this. And I believe he followed up saying, depicting and promoting are not the same thing. Because later down in the policy, it says Jagex property cannot be used to promote alcohol, tobacco, gambling, drug use, or any kind of illegal activity. And that's fine. You don't want to have Axankos being used as a poster child for Joe Camel cigarettes. That's fine. Sure. They don't want to do that with their IP. But they say specifically creating. So, you can't draw your Zilliana not safe for work. You can't write, a dirty fanfic about Sliske or what have you, because arguably it would be in violation of these rules. And it's really far. And I get it. No, you don't want your IP being used for porn. I'm
Is
working
Maud
on a novel.
Do Maud Blackwitch's paintings fall under this?
Arguably,
maybe.
I would assume that she would get individual permission for creating it. It's obviously part of the game IP.
Yeah.
And this brings in some really interesting IP law, because Disney, for example, has one of the most restrictive IP laws in the world, including for their own creators. And when you sign on as an animator or as a cartoonist or as an artist or what have you, there is a clause that says any work that you create of our characters belongs to us. And there is apparently a not safe for work archive just of all this work that the artists have done that are legally owned by Disney. They can't post it anywhere. Full of lewds. Absolutely full of lewds. It's a little off topic. Little off topic. Actually, technically, Jagex does own your not safe for work. That's a little later down in the policy, but this is way too overreaching. This is way too over the top. It's literally saying you cannot create it. Now, again, I do not expect Jagex to actually come knocking on the door and sending out cease and desists.
No.
But the language is in there. The language is in there, and we can't just operate on handshake agreements.
Yeah, exactly,
they could, and we don't know.
Many in-game rules, we don't know if or when something will be policed, and they have the right to police it as they see fit. Which
yes, and they could say, "Well, you were fine with the policy when it came out." Like, yeah, we were fine because it wasn't being policed.
Right. We were not fine with it, but we could deal with it. Right.
So lots of joking, lots of memeing. This is way too overreaching. It absolutely is. This is something that I'll also touch upon a little bit later once we're done combing through the policy. But Jagex cannot necessarily police the creative and individual works that is being done with their IP. They can police it in a commercial sense if money is being made off of it. But they can't police it from a personal sense, and that's where
don't make this. Just don't make money off.
That's where fair use and fair dealing come in, and that's later down the line.
All right, misleading content.
This is pretty boilerplate. You can't claim to be Jagex, but I think this is an important thing to highlight because it's one thing if you are creating something and saying I am Jagex or I am Mod Dragon, and this is the thing that I have created. This is official Jagex stuff. You can't do that. I really doubt people are doing that unless, it's for an obvious joke or what have you, which, is not really in the realm of what we're talking about. But it's important to note. Don't go around claiming, to be Mod Jack and creating the next quest. All right. Use your name, or at least use whatever cool username that you've come up with.
Yeah, and obviously things like phishing and whatnot are going to be misleading content that have always been illegal, and this just codifies that further. Anyways, carry on.
Phishing with a P, not fishing with an F.
True.
No more swordfish for you. No more rocktails. So the final section we're going to go over to is 7.1 and 7.2, which is IP ownership. And this is under the banner of fanfiction, which is a little odd. Again, they're really calling out fanfiction here. But if you look at the language of that, it technically applies to all creative works. It says, basically, if you create something new following these rules, I assume they refer to fanfiction, but again, really vague language here. Distribution of your content in any form constitutes a grant by you of a royalty-free, non-exclusive, irrevocable, transferable, sub-licensable, worldwide license to Jagex and any of Jagex's partners to modify and distribute that content. They can use, or we can use your name if we choose to, for any purpose and without obligation to pay you anything, obtain your approval, or give you credit. And this license to Jagex shall be intended to survive any termination, expiration, or amendment of these rules. So that is ironclad and not in a good way. First of all, it basically says if you create any derivative work, if you create a fanfic, if you create a piece of fan art, Jagex could theoretically, according to these rules, rip it from you, post it on their site, not email you, not give you credit or anything. They could even sell prints of it. And they have the right to, just by virtue of you publishing a work on DeviantArt, on Discord, on Twitter, on fanfiction.net,
ArtStation,
anything like that. And even if they, according to this amendment in here, even if they amend the rules or change it, it's still applicable. So technically the axe has already fallen on this. And again, I'm not a lawyer, but this is how I'm seeing the rules.
It feels all encompassing.
Yeah, it is very totalitarian. It's very all encompassing. And it's, again, it's kind of out of the left field. It's unnecessarily all encompassing.
Yeah, and you interact, I assume, with writers and artists and whatnot from the community. Are you connected to any writers, artists, etc., from any other communities? Out of curiosity.
So I am aware and I have interacted with other fandoms in terms of this. And I have actually looked at other fandom policies.
Okay. That's where I was going.
I've looked at fandom policies from Nintendo. I've looked at fandom policies from Hasbro. And most of them have a very live and let live attitude with this kind of thing. It's generally don't try and make money off of our IP. Don't try and impersonate us. Don't try and rip our IP off. So, don't just copy text paste the text to say this book that we want to sell and publish it online somewhere for free. And again, if somebody wants to yell at me over Twitter, by all means, I've not seen a policy like this that unilaterally permits a company to just take a work from an artist or a writer and use it any way they please.
It's effectively taking ownership of it.
Yeah.
They are claiming non-exclusivity is the only thing that is vaguely creators focused, which is effectively them saying, we can take it, but you can still use it within the realms of this agreement. And
again, I would see them say, maybe justifying this by saying, what if we want to publish your art and show it at RuneFest, or we want to show it in our newsletter, and maybe that's monetized because it has advertisements at it, or we're making money at that event. Fine. But they can still do it without credit, which is a little crazy. They could just rip they could just rip your art and say, here's some art. Don't know who made it.
Like, you remember we had initially before the Extinction launch, there was the fan commissioned poster for the Extinction launch, but before that there were other pieces of fan art for the various God Wars fronts. Now imagine Jagex was not benevolent, and we're going to assume for the time being that the corporate entity Jagex is benevolent in this regard. Imagine if they could have just taken those Elder God Wars front art pieces before they started actually commissioning players for them and say, hey, we're using this. This is our banner artwork for this piece of content. So that's one potential reality where that could happen. Thankfully, they haven't given any indication that they would do that, and they've been very good with the people that they have commissioned to do those pieces of art. So,
but it's still in the writing, and it's still there. And this policy is what is lasting, not Discord reassurances.
And
not,
I'd imagine
handshakes.
I'd imagine most of your discussions about this policy and in general, what it means for writers, has been with community management and head of influencers, Maud Bolton. I don't think you've actually talked to anybody from legal yet, have you?
No, I've spoken exclusively to Maud Bolton, and he did give me some feedback, and I did follow him up with a lot of the arguments that I'm about to present here. And so far, as of the time of this recording, Thursday, July 28th, in the evening, all the Brits are asleep right now, I've gotten nothing back. I've gotten no responses. There's just been radio silence.
And it's not like you just went to him on Wednesday or Tuesday.
Yeah, no, I contacted him last week, and I followed up with him a couple days ago. And, I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. I'm this is not the top of their priority list. And that's fine. They have a job to do. They have things to do. I still find it a little bit eerie because we have had the creative mods that are active within the art communities tell us that they'll keep us posted, and they have been pretty communicative about it. And they've also been pretty quiet on this subject as well. And again, they have day jobs, they have things to do. This is not the top of the priority list. I'm hoping that the legal team is all away on holiday or something, because that's what they do in England in the summer. And, they're just taking their sweet time to email back. I've worked in the corporate world. I know how that kind of thing can go, but it's still a little worrying that they haven't, gotten back immediately. And again, this could be very tinfoil hat. I'm probably worrying over nothing.
I think you make a good point that without being too alarmist, it is possible that the legal team has come to them and said, hey, we want to make sure that we're monetizing where we can because we need money to be coming in and we need to make a tighter policy. This is what it's going to be. Don't speak out against this, please. And the mods are like, well, we don't agree, but we like our jobs and we understand, so we won't speak out. Like, there's a world where that's the case, and I'm not saying that's the case here. It could be. But like equally, the thing that it certainly signifies to me is that there is in some way a serious disconnect between the legal team or whoever is writing this and the like more community focused mod side or community side, right? Where the community and the mods say, hey, we want to support these things, we want to do this, this is like clearly a lot of them are creators. And so they're limited in this in a somewhat similar way. Obviously not knowing what their actual contracts entail. And so it's woof, it just seems like there was a disconnect somewhere along the line between what is either in the best interest or in the like goals of a lot of the community and game kind of side of things, a lot of the mods versus the legal and I'm going to say probably economic side of things.
Business.
Which is an interesting disconnect.
The suits, the business.
Yeah.
So, and again, I want to emphasize that even though I am going to be discussing what Mod Bolton told me here, this is not on him. This is not on the CMs or the CSs.
Yeah.
This is not on the creative mods.
Same disclaimer on all the RuneScape Twitter heads. These are the opinions of myself and do not respect the opinions or others of Jagex and its affiliates.
Yeah, and I just want to say from my side as on the content creation side, everybody that I've interacted with from CM, influence, etc., bottom to top, has always been absolutely wonderful with us. So we're going into this and we're giving them the benefit of the doubt. We're not assuming maliciousness forward, but we do need to kind of look into that in terms of what might be possible going forward with this. So
yes, with that said, I think we're going to dive into my side of things, what I've been looking at over the past week and a half or so, and, arguably the topic that I have the most dubious expertise in, which is fan fiction. And the question is, why fan fiction? Why are they coming down specifically so much on fan fiction, especially with that 15K word count? So, and again, I think a lot of this policy is not coming from a place of maliciousness. I think it's just really badly worded, and it again represents that disconnect with the brass and the actual creators. And I know that Jagex prides itself, or at least the on the ground teams really pride themselves in being really close to the creators. I mean, Mod Dragon and Mod Black Witch are literally participating in the RuneScape art community's art fight right now. They're exchanging art with people. They're drawing art of people's characters. It's wonderful. It's awesome. I love that. And, that same sentiment and that same closeness is not shared by the people making this policy. And again, I know that a lot of the creative mods were just baffled by the language in this as well. So let's start with kind of the big fish of it, which is why 15K? And I had the opportunity again to talk to Mod Bolton about this, and he told me to. And
he's head of influence, right?
Yes, he's the head of influence, and he was the one who was interacting with me most directly in terms of my questions about this. So, and my questions to him were, okay, so would we have to ask permission? What would happen if we wouldn't ask permission? Why is there the 15K limit? And the answer was it is to prevent people from making unofficial books, as we may choose to partner with a third-party publisher to make official books in the future. And he said that this kind of license typically has a limitation on what constitutes commercial competition. Basically, the 15K word limit is a guideline that they are determining that a piece of fanfic can't be reasonably construed to be a novel or a novella, which they might do a deal around. So they're saying comply with this policy just so you are protecting yourself to be construed as commercial competition by a third party with an exclusive right to produce books based on the Jagex IP. So they're basically saying, if you write a really big fic and you don't run it by us, this third-party publisher, if we decide to publish a lore book or we decide to publish another novelization, they might say, hey, that fic over there is competing because it's really long and we want to publish a really long book and it's on the same topic and it's from the same IP. That's competition. You have to take that down. And that doesn't make any sense. It makes zero sense, and I'm going to tell you why.
Okay, because my question with that is, could this have been done in a lens of protecting the fan fiction writer? Just playing devil's advocate with this in terms of, we don't necessarily plan to go after these guys, but if you were to write something that would be this long, and we also at some point decided to commission a book to be done, an official book in a different capacity, we don't want to hurt you.
Right. No, I think that's the angle that they are coming from, which is, a nice sentiment, but it still doesn't make any sense. And if you understood copyright law, then again, it does not make any sense whatsoever.
And we are going to go into that briefly.
Right. So first of all, like I said, 15K is incredibly arbitrary. I guess that's the limit that their lawyers told them that they could go by based on whatever book deals that they may come up with in the future. Again, it's not really tied to any sort of previous precedent. Novella, it's anywhere from 10 to 40K words, novels 50K words. And it's a word count limit is not tied to copyright violation. Again, you can't just go up to somebody and say, you published a 30,000 word fan fiction about this thing, you're violating my copyright. Copyright and IP protection is done by a completely different set of standards. The main argument here is that fics would be a competition to, again, any novelizations. And it's a very, very flawed argument because it's not competition. Maybe somewhat a competition of attention, I guess, but that doesn't hold water. So the key thing in terms of defining fic is it's known, or fan fiction, and I mean, proper fan fiction, not just, again, copy pasting something into AO3. It falls under what's known in the United States as fair use, and in the UK, which is what these rules are under, as fair dealing. So fair use basically protects works that would technically fall under copyright violation, aka using an intellectual property when you're not an approved party. And it's generally looked at by 4 policies. First is looking at the purpose and the character of the use of that work, whether it's educational or nonprofit. If you're reading from a book that is copyrighted in a classroom, but you're using it in an educational manner, that's generally protected.
Sure.
Second is the nature of the copyrighted work, and which is to say how much it's taking from the IP. Copyright violation would be somebody, pirating Star Wars and distributing that. That's taking the heart and the essence of the work. If somebody decided to do one of those YouTube chop-ups where it's like Star Wars, but every time they say the Force, it gets a little faster, that's arguably more transformative, because it's not the same as sitting down and watching Star Wars. It's a meme.
I'm fairly certain you can find videos like that on TikTok and whatnot.
Right. So that arguably falls under fair use. Third is the amount and the substantiality of the original work. So if you're, say, quoting Star Wars in a book, and you have a character say, use the Force, Luke, or whatever, and they're quoting it and it's obviously from Star Wars, fine. if you're copy pasting the script of Star Wars into a book and there's otherwise no or very little original material, that's a completely different thing. And finally is the effect on the potential market. And which is to say, are you stealing competition from the person whose IP you are taking? And this is also very interesting. If you want a fun little movie about copyright law, I really recommend watching Be Kind Rewind with Jack Black. But the final argument that was made within that movie, because the whole movie was about a couple of dudes who accidentally erase all of the films in a VHS rental store, very dated film. And so they decide to recreate all the films by just filming it themselves in their backyard.
Oh.
And one of the arguments for copyright law is, it wasn't competing with Star Wars. Nobody was going out to get this, copy of Star Wars from this VHS store or Jurassic Park and saying, I'm going to watch this instead of Jurassic Park. They're not saying my need for Jurassic Park has been fulfilled by watching this terrible, crappy movie of Jurassic Park. But it added a supplementary effect. So arguably did not have an effect on the potential market. Now, if they'd gone and ripped, Jurassic Park and just slapped it on a VHS and, sold it, that would affect it.
Makes
then,
sense.
People
Makes
would
sense.
be going and buy it. That's, and that's the same thing that Jagex is technically protecting with their merching. They're saying, please don't rip our official maps and sell them on, bed pillows on Redbubble, because that's taking the market from us.
Now, how is it different in the UK?
So the UK is a little bit more watery in terms of that, but it does cross over. Fair dealing, as it's known in the UK, protects works that are pastiche or parody of the original work, generally with attention to non-commercial application. And the important word here for fic is pastiche. Pastiche is basically something that is similar in style or in substance to the work, but not a direct replacement.
Okay. And
so
I think from where that word originates, you end up in a situation where it was, I think, focused around art initially? Question mark?
It was focused around art. So if somebody, say, wanted to recreate the Mona Lisa in ketchup, that would fall under fair dealing.
Okay.
For writing, it's still up in the air. And that's the really fun thing about this. And this is something I'm going to emphasize a little bit more later. We don't really have any court cases behind this. There has not really been an instance where fan fiction has come to scrutiny as we know it, which is to say non-commercial fan fiction has come to scrutiny in a court. And that is partly because it does fall under fair use and fair dealing, and most cease and desists are chased away by that.
Yeah.
But it also just has been tested. Nobody has really...
And is that because mass online fan fiction is a relatively young industry compared to copyright law in general?
Yes. And it's also an old industry. There's a history with this, which is another reason why I and a lot of other fan fiction writers that I've spoken to are feeling very tetchy about this. And that particular history is directly because of the medium and because of the behavior of past authors, and it continues to affect fan fiction today. So I'm going to be getting into that later. But a core part of fair use, and again, fair use is something that is completely based on common law, which is to say previous court precedents. And it has been very contended over, of course, with the advent of the internet. But a lot of the court cases that we're still looking at, and that I'm going to mention, were actually drafted in the 90s, which is very interesting. But a core part of fair use is what is called a work's transformative nature. So when you are creating a fair use work, you have to transform a substantial amount of the work to be something else. In terms of fic, this means introducing new characters. Maybe it means translating the work into a new medium. In terms of art, this is creating, uniquely styled art. or just making new stories based off the material.
And that would have been your original RuneScape fan fiction, converting the RuneScape online game medium into text in a novel or book.
Right. This transformative clause, it comes from specifically a essay by district court judge at the time, Pierre Laval. This was in the 90s. Basically, he defined a transformative work as saying it's something that adds value to the original. Basically, if the quoted matter is used as raw material, transformed in the creation of new information, new aesthetics, new insights and understandings, that is the very type of activity that the fair use doctrine intends to protect, the enrichment of society. It is seeing the work in a new light. It is playing the game and saying, I'm going to create art of my character, or I'm going to create art in my particular art style. I'm going to take the image that I have in my head and I'm going to put it to canvas, not a screenshot, but, creating original work. Or it is looking at a quest and saying, this is what my character is doing.
Right.
Based on my lens of it, and I'm going to write that down.
And based on that lens and this case that we're talking about here, you start to see exactly why on the fan fiction and art side that this is starting to raise so many questions. I will freely admit that I'm not an artist. I tried painting once or twice before, and it didn't really go as planned. But one thing I did learn with that is that you can't paint the same thing 2 times in a row. You're always going to have things that are very different in that, and it's that unique fingerprint, that artist's impression that's different each and every time, that I think is kind of what we're working up to here, if I'm kind of catching your drift.
If somebody were to look at a photo of a copyrighted work, or if they were to watch Star Wars and write down what they saw through their lens, how they interpreted the character, how they interpreted the character movements, or their experience in the movie theater, the shock they feel, at the "no, I am your father" moment. That is arguably transformative. And the thing is that everybody, sees the game through this unique lens. And I'm sure that everybody at some point, playing RuneScape has thought, oh man, my character has this fashionscape and they're doing this thing, and they came from Tutorial Island, or they came from Lumbridge, or what have you. Or, I've seen somebody post on Reddit saying, oh, I found my old notebook from 2010 when I was in middle school and I wrote down my character's adventures.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is that fan fiction, again, in its truest form, and not just talking about a straight up copy paste, it is not a one-on-one of the game. It uses the game as raw material. And it just can't be construed as competition. First of all, it's a different medium. It's a completely different thing than the game. And of course, there arises the argument, well, what if we want to do a novelization of this?
Yeah.
It's not on the same level of what Jagex can offer. The key thing that we have to understand here is that Jagex, they're privy to resources that otherwise you as a fan fiction writer would not have, which is to say the canon.
Yeah.
A Jagex sourced work would have the advantage of being canon. And,
And to our knowledge, those books don't exactly exist. There's people like Raven and Jack who do have notebooks of potential lore angles, but to our understanding, there is no official internal guidebook of what is canon and what is lore. It's within the heads of Jagex.
And
there are the 2 books, right? It's, what is it, The Defense of Falador? There's something,
The Betrayal of Falador.
Thank you.
And that has an interesting story, because that was actually unsolicited fan fiction that T.S. Church mailed to Jagex back in, I think, 2009, and they just approved it and published it. Probably not going to happen. But again, so, say Jagex wants to release a novelization. They want to do the adventures of Moya. They want to do an adventures of Wahisatel. They want to talk about what Azadadra is doing around in Fernesque right now. They know what's happening there. They're putting out the word of God there. My fics don't do that. Fan fictions don't.
Yeah,
You know,
and you
there's
just have what's been published to you as a player in
Right.
week-to-week updates.
Right, and that's what everybody has access to. You know, it's there's zero guarantee that my speculation is going to come to fruit. It's a separate entity. It's not on the same canonical ground as a licensed book. And I really don't think that people are going to, you know, pick up a hard fall and read through it and it's like, cool, great. I'm never going to read another Jagex book again.
Right.
You know,
it's a different, it's a different dish.
Interesting on this is that I didn't remember this at the start, but one of the other games that I play, Star Trek Online, has a policy for their devs where their devs aren't actually allowed to read anything that a fan creates in the event.
What?
Yeah, in the event that the dev
influencing?
would be influenced by it, they don't want to necessarily have to pay out the person who wrote that. So there's a very strict policy around the Star Trek Online community that if you write a new episode or if you write a Star Trek Online fan fiction, the devs just won't read it because of that reason. And I hope we're not going that direction with Jagex here.
It's so somebody from a creative perspective and somebody who has been involved in author circles and also somebody who is writing her own novel. Spoiler alert. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. There are very, very pro fan fiction writers out there. Neil Gaiman is a very prominent example. He won a Nebula Award for a Cthulhu Sherlock Holmes fan fiction. He says explicitly, fanfic away. I love fan fiction. It's, you know, it's great for writing. I'm not going to read it.
Right.
And, you know, that's on his prerogative. And a lot of writers, as pro fan fiction as they are, will say, I don't read it. And I'm fine. If Jagex walks out and says the devs are not allowed to read fan fiction, I'll be a little sad for them because that's a part of the closeness of the game. But again, that is in their legal best interest.
Yeah.
But the key thing there is that the burden is on them. Here they're putting the burden on us. They're putting the burden on fan fiction writers. Saying,
Very true.
Just by virtue of publishing the fic, you are competing with us and you're influencing us. And it's like, just because it exists does not mean that it is.
And when you put it in that lens, that's bizarre.
Yeah. And the thing is that, you know, it's just not, it's the exact opposite of competitive. You know, if anything, fic increases engagement with the source material. I know when I wrote a hard fall, I signed up for RuneScape membership again, so I could do research into it. You know, it requires research and a continuous investment into the community and the game. And it evokes similar participation in the people who read it. I've had comments on my fic saying, I quit playing RuneScape and I read your fic and I'm back in RuneScape. Or I was getting involved in RuneScape again and I found your fic and it got me back into the world again. It's like I'm in 2008 again.
That's wonderful. That you must feel.
It is.
How do you feel about that?
I mean, I love it.
Okay.
You know, as a writer,
I didn't want to
really
put words in your mouth. I was assuming that's how you felt, but I just didn't want to put words in your mouth.
I mean, it's I'm sharing my love for the game, and you know, in that fic, it was you know, I was sharing my love for the game and all the elements in there. You know, the storytelling, the mods who put it together, all that, and that people could pick up on that and, you know, feel great about it. That's awesome. You know, and it's supplementary material at worst. It is something that somebody will read and go, huh, and then, you know, move on with their lives. But at best, it's free marketing. It's free marketing.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, look at Supernatural, look at Marvel, look at Harry Potter. They are all some of the most popular fandoms to write fic for if you look on Archive of Our Own. And, you know, I don't think that's put a dent in sales. You know, if anything, again, it's increasing engagement. You know, people are rewatching the movie so they can quote key things. They're thinking about the movie. They're talking about the movie to their friends. They're thinking, oh, I love that one scene. I want to, you know, go back and think about it again. I can't wait for the next Marvel movie. I'm writing all this fan fiction to get hyped up. You know, it's a hype train. It really is. And I highly doubt that fic is going out there and being a replacement for people. even for one-to-one mediums like books, like Harry
exactly.
Potter.
And I mean, if anything, you're going to read a chapter of the fiction, then you're going to pop RuneScape open on that same iPad you were reading it.
Mm-hmm.
So
exactly. So another key part of this competitive argument, and Thaxi, if you want to add anything.
No, I've got no, nothing related to the competition. No.
So another key thing about this non-competition is that fic is non-commercial. I am not going out there and taking my fic and shoving it in Barnes and Noble and making money off of it.
Right.
And there is a lot of protection on this. There's a reason that fan fiction commissions are not a thing. And that has a lot of historical context that I'll go into later. But the key thing is, for my case and for most other fic writers' case, I publish all of my fics on Archive of Our Own, which is part of the Organization for Transformative Works. They're a nonprofit that basically tries to protect fandoms from a lot of the litigation that they have faced in the past.
Interesting.
And they expressly forbid commercialization of works. There are no paywalls. If you link your Patreon or your Ko-fi or anything in your comments or anything, they will zap it, and they do it to protect the writers. I'm not making money off of my fic. I'm not. And I am by no means stealing revenue from Jagex by publishing of a fic, whether it's over 15,000 words or not.
Just think about the publicity behind your Golden Gnome nominated one. That would have the exact opposite effect.
Right.
With that in mind, here's my devil's advocate question for you then. And this could be totally disrespectful, but is it, like, if this goes through and it's terrible and they start enforcing it, and for whatever reason they're allowed to do so, would it be possible and would it be within the rules to potentially just publish a longer work, 2 chapters at a time, and just say, yes, this is a separate book. Wink.
So you brought up an interesting point there, because that's exactly what Bolton suggested. He said, if you want to skirt around this policy, you can post things as separate works and say, this is chapter 1, this is chapter 2, this is chapter 3. And you know what? Fine. That's a way to get around it. Haha. But the problem is that you shouldn't be skirting around that. It shouldn't be in place in the first place.
Right.
I mean,
agreed. No,
it's an inconvenience to the writer, and it messes up, the archival system that you're on, and you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. It's like somebody telling you, like, hey, did you know that if you go to the toilet or more than once, you could steal more squares of paper or what have you? It's like, it's free. It's not a rule. It's not even there. You shouldn't be trying to sneak around it. It's just not enforceable.
Right. And even the other side of that, to use a RuneScape example, if you show up at this penguin and emote at the right time, you can spot this penguin 50,000 times in a row, right? Like, in that situation, you get the opposite issue where somebody's skirting around a rule that exists for a reason. In this case, the rule doesn't seem, 1, legally, 2, just like, fundamentally to be doing anything if you can just get around it and that's what they want you to do, right?
It's not something you should be walking on eggshells around. You, again, as long as your fic is truly transformative, and again, you're not ripping the entirety of the text of Betrayal of Falador and trying to post it on AO3, right? You shouldn't be asking for permission from Jagex at all. They shouldn't be interacting with you on it at all. I mean, maybe if they want to reach out and be like, hey, can we feature this? Fine. But you should not be going up to Jagex and saying, oh, please, Mr. Jagex, can I please post my fic? No, it's transformative. It falls under fair use. It falls under fair dealing. It's not even in the realm of what needs to be asked for permission. It's just not.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and like I mentioned, there are very few court cases that really, stand to fan fiction. And what is most likely going to happen, if that were ever happen, is that the defendants would have to cobble together a case based on previous precedents. And one really interesting one that I came across was Louis Gallup Toys v. Nintendo of America in 1992. And I'll go over this pretty briefly, so not to bore all you people. But basically, Louis Gallup Toys basically created a module similar to a Game Shark. It was called the Games Genie, I believe. And if any of you have played Pokemon or any Nintendo games, it was basically a modifier engine that allowed you to plug it into the console and change the speed of characters.
Interesting.
It let you modify a certain thing, so on and so forth. So if you were to do that with RuneScape, of course, that would violate certain policies because, it would speed up the character and all that. But it wasn't an online game. This was the 90s. But basically, it allowed users in a vacuum to modify copyright products for their own use. And the court actually ruled in Gallup's favor. And the deciding statement was a party who distributes copyrighted content cannot dictate how that work is to be enjoyed. They argued that the device, the Game Genie, cannot operate without the game. And in a similar sense, and I am cobbling together an argument here a little bit. Again, I am not a lawyer, but in the same sense, fic is meta. It cannot exist without the game. Generally, you need to participate in RuneScape in order to understand a fic. You need to know who Armadillo is. You need to know how Extinction or Twilight of the Gods or Slisuke's endgame goes down. You need to know who the signature heroes are or what have you. You need to know what Lumbridge is and what it looks like. It cannot exist without the game itself.
Who is this Slisk person we keep talking about, or I keep reading the name of? Yeah, exactly. It doesn't make anything, of course.
But in all seriousness, it is a meta product that cannot exist without the game, and arguably, it is a modification of the game for an individual's own enjoyment.
So it's effectively think of it as like a written-based mod then, which we know how mods have been ruled on in the past and what the Louis Gallup Toys versus Nintendo showed. That's an interesting
and even
comparison.
Then it doesn't even modify the game directly.
Yeah.
You could argue that it taints people's perception of it, but I mean, so does the entire world. Again, This has not been tested in the courts, and It'll be really interesting to see what arguments come up in terms of that. So, again, but just one interesting court case that I wanted to cite.
All right. Then we get to intellectual property.
Yeah.
I assume that's where you want to go next with this.
Yeah, no, section 7, the IP rule. Like I mentioned, this doesn't really make any sense. It's way too heavy-handed for Jagex to say, we own your IP. And again, I don't expect Jagex to come in and swoop up all the fan work and put it in a big old mosaic and sell it as a quilt online and not, cite anyone. It would be kind of cool if they did that, though they'd have to skip all the naughty ones.
I mean, they don't have to.
No, it's banned under here, don't you know? It's illegal now.
But only if it's not licensed by Jagex.
Oh man. So, it's really heavy-handed, and I actually had the benefit of speaking to a lawyer from the Organization for Transformative Works.
Oh, interesting.
Fun fact for all of you fic writers out there: OTW does have free legal counsel. So, not for your divorce or anything, but if it's anything pertaining to fic and copyright law, they can help you out.
Let's hope we won't be needing that, though.
I hope so as well. But she basically told me, and I'm quoting directly from her, as a matter of U.S. law, and presumably UK law as well, because that does overlap. I am not a lawyer. Fan authors own copyright in the original elements of their own fan works. They don't own anything about the underlying work, but they do own what they've contributed, including, for example, original characters, settings, plots, and word choices. And this is where, the previous part of the policy that we discussed were in which Jagex has established that the player avatar is under their jurisdiction, is under their ownership. This is where it gets muddy. But basically, it means that Jagex can't arguably just pull a work wholesale from the author they could theoretically claim copyright on the original parts, how they decide to mince the plot, how, their own character and what they're doing, and so on and so forth. And again, there aren't really any previous court cases that back this up. There was one also in the 90s, Anderson v. Stallone, where a guy wrote a script for Rocky IV and then showed it to Sylvester Stallone and then attempted to sue him, claiming that they had used his work in Rocky IV without paying him. And apparently the courts ruled against him, saying that he had already created an illegal derivative work based off of the Rocky IV script because he had created it unsolicited. But that was back in the 90s. It wasn't strictly with fic, and it wasn't strictly with published fic. It was more of a private matter. So we don't know how this is going to play out.
And plus, we're also dealing with a movie
pre-internet
versus a game, too.
Yes. But I think my main thesis statement here, in terms of, the 15K limit and, requiring permission from Jagex for that, or, them asking that you run it by them and them construing it as competition for, whatever novelizations they decide to publish in the future, and whether this is them coming down on the writers or a third party, whatever. Fair dealing transformative fan fiction does not require permission from the IP holder, period. It's not a thing. Fair use and fair dealing protects you. You shouldn't be asking Jagex for permission. They should not be requiring it from you. It's not enforceable.
I'd like to hear that also. This is from a U.S. lawyer, but I'd also like to hear the exact same thing from a UK lawyer on this matter, too. That would be interesting.
And again, UK copyright law, I'm not as familiar with. It does somewhat reflect the U.S. law, but there have not been as many cases reflecting it. And I don't know if it's smaller. I don't know if it's because, in the UK, copyright is a little bit less rabid. Maybe I just have not been digging into the right sites for long enough. But, I would assume that, again, there is that precedent set with it.
All right. So where does that leave us?
Where does it lead us? I mean, there's the whole question of why the hell it even matters.
Yeah.
We're a small community. We're
relatively compared to, like you mentioned, Harry Potter and Marvel, right?
Yeah. And we're small even compared to the fan artists. There are a handful of writers I know, a fair amount of them. If somebody posts something on AO3, I generally know them. Sometimes I'll have even beta read for them. And, it seems like a very silly hill to die on. But, it's a hill that I'm ready to die on. Jagex doesn't have to enforce these rules. And again, I really don't think they're going to start sending down takedown notices. As much as I joke, I don't actually expect to hear a lawyer banging on my door tomorrow morning. But this gives them way too much future wiggle room. This gives them way too much wiggle room. It sets things down in writing that, again, are just not enforceable and are just not a good precedent to let slide by. And the thing is that there is a precedent for legal action against fic in the past. Fic has been the source of a lot of litigation. It was one of the first derivative type of work that was uploaded on the internet back in the day, and one of the easiest for overzealous authors to find, way more so than fan art, because just of the limitations of computers and connections back in the day. So, people uploading fic would be very easily findable by authors. And, Anne Rice. Anne Rice is a notorious name in the fanfic community. Robin Hobb, even George R.R. Martin, back in the day, they have taken legal action against fic in the past. They have sent, takedown notices and threatened to sue. And most authors complied with these takedown notices. You're a kid in Wisconsin writing Lestat/fic, and you get this email from a lawyer, and you're like, oh God, I don't want my parents to know, and you just take it down. And it's spawned a whole culture. If you have ever read a fic before around 2014, 15, you'll most likely see a disclaimer on it saying, I do not own this property. The IP holder holds this. This is merely my interpretation, yada, 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 yada. Similar to what the disclaimer that Jagex is now asking for. And that was because of Annie Rice, and it spawned a whole culture of private servers where you had to have a password to hop onto read fic. And
Yikes.
that's how they filtered out potential lawyers.
Yep.
And again, today, fics are not generally written for commissions. And if you even mention that you have a coffee or, a tip me or a Patreon as a writer, people will jump on you and be like, oh God, no, you're going to get us taken down. And there's still an anti-fan work sentiment out there. Just in 2021, Games Workshop, IP holder of Warhammer 40K,
right, I remember
was
this.
sending takedown notices for fan animations because they had their own they had their own animation suite that they wanted to do. And, so many brilliant fan animations were taken down. And the thing is that, these big companies, they're the ones with the lawyers. We don't have them. Well, we do through, Organization for Transformative Works, but that took time. And those roles were written in metaphorical blood after Anne Rice. And, this is not even outside of Jagex's purview. I don't know how familiar you are with 117's case for the HD OSRS.
I think we had a look at it when that was happening, and we went through that and were actually pleasantly surprised when Jagex decided that they were going to work with him at the end of the day.
But if you're not familiar, this was a RuneLite plugin that 117 worked on, put thousands of hours of work into to basically develop an HD graphical overhaul for OSRS. And just before the finish line, and, mind you, after he had reached out to Jagex and asked if it was a problem, and, they gave no indication that it was right before the deadline, Jagex came in and shut it down. They claimed the plugin was competing with a, and I quote, similarly themed graphical project that they were working on. They construed that as competition, this non-commercial, free-to-use fan work.
And
we know Jagex.
Did we ever learn if they were actually developing an OSRS HD on that, or did 117s just take the place of that?
We don't know. Maybe they're doing their own thing. I believe he said that he was willing to work alongside them on that and even take down his own when that was released. But I think it was indicated that it was in the very early stages. So it would have put the whole thing on hold. It would have prevented an HD client or an HD overhaul from being there for a very long time because, if we didn't have 117s. But the bottom line is that we know that Jagex executives are willing, or at least were willing, to quash fan projects that they perceived as competition to their own monetizable projects. And is this still the case? I don't know. I'm not a mind reader.
Right.
These rules certainly give them the power to do that.
And we also need to point out that 117 wasn't inevitably nominated for a Golden Gnome.
Right.
And I think won.
No, he did get the gnome. And, that is, the gnomes do, or gnome nominees, I believe, do have to be approved by Jagex on some level, so they don't have a gold farming website be nominated or what have you. But again, I have a feeling that it's much more on the creative mod level. And we know that there was a huge disconnect between the creative mods and the brass on that. And they only pushed it back after a massive protest from the OSRS community. Old style Fally 302 rioting. And, and I don't know if that kind of support could be drawn for the fanfic community. Again, we're pretty small.
Yeah,
I really don't think
a lot smaller. Do you think you're going to need that? Because I think with that, I don't know if you want to say what you think is going to happen with this next, or what's your mind space right now on this?
So again, I really want to have the benefit of the doubt here. And I'm doing my best to have the benefit of the doubt. I'm not coming out guns blazing. I'm not, coming out saying, oh, we must have war or what have you. Again, I think that this is based more on a disconnect between, the execs and the legal team.
Yeah.
And, just a fundamental understanding of how fandom works and how copyright law works. Even though that's technically their job. So, it is sad that the burden of proof is on us and, is on, people saying, no, this is actually not reasonable. This is not enforceable. You got to push this back. In the words of the OTW legal team in the same email that they talked to me to, these kinds of terms the Jagex is setting forth do not supersede the law. A fan work can be non-infringing fair use even if it does not fit within the company's guidelines. So it's not enforceable. And I'm really hoping for the best case scenario. I think the best case scenario is going to happen. I'm being cautiously optimistic. I think Jagex is going to come back and say, how do we tweak these rules? They'll tweak the rules. The rules have been tweaked. They've taken feedback.
They know how much they need their community.
Yes, they do.
Especially on the RS3 side these days. On old school from the beginning, to get anything through, they did. And that's one thing that we don't see in many other games, is just how important the community is to what happens at Jagex. So I am hoping for the best on here with you.
Yes. I hope that they modify the rules. And again, we move forward and it's all great. And I'll have, done a lot of research on LexisNexis for absolutely nothing. And I'll have gotten a rant about copyright law for, an hour or so. And it's all hunky dory.
Is there anything,
but,
in terms of wrapping this up, is there anything that you need to tell the community in particular, our community, Jagex, and people who might not be aware of what exactly is going on here? Or is there just anything you want to wrap up with in particular?
So, I want to say, again, even though they're not enforcing these rules right now, they need to be modified, both for the sake of the future and for now. This already has a chilling effect. I've already had writers come to me and say, can I publish this? What do I do? Are my fics going to be taken down? Keep publishing. Keep doing your thing. Don't ask Jagex for permission. It's not enforceable. It's just not a thing that needs to happen. And again, I really don't think they're combing through AO3. I think you're all right. And again, I think these rules are going to be modified. For the question, can Jagex sue me? And again, this is very out of the left field. I doubt it's going to happen, but it is a question. Can Jagex sue? Bless my old journalism law professor. She used to stop a class in the middle of a lecture and say, students, what is our mantra? And we would have to repeat back to her, anyone can sue you at any time for anything. So Jagex could theoretically send you a takedown notice. Again, I really don't think it's going to happen. If that does happen, if that
does happen, we'll have you back on the show, because that's something else.
Oh yeah, that'll be fun. I'll take the day off of work. God, but that's where, even if you say it's not enforceable, you can send a counter notice. And theoretically, it could be argued in court. Again, the less than a 0.01% chance of that happening. It isn't. For fic writers, I really recommend that you migrate your works to AO3. They have a legal team that will back you up in terms of this sort of thing. And it covers your butt because they follow fair use policy. They don't let you commercialize fics, and you could say it's on AO3. They don't let me commercialize. It is fair use. And have backups, just to have backups. If you have an old live journal, if you have, stuff on a Tumblr.
That's a name I haven't heard for a long time, live journal.
If you have a fanfiction.net account, just have a backup of your stuff. Good old rule of 3, all that jazz. And I want to iterate that it's not a bad idea for Jagex to have a FanWorks policy. You know, it means that the expectations are clear. You know, it means that Jagex can protect its IP, and, you know, honest merchers don't have to compete with, you know, lazy Redbubble prints and all that.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely in Jagex's best interest to loosen this up. You know, there's very
especially
little
on the
point.
fanfic and art side. We need to underscore
Yes.
that again.
You know, the community is the lifeblood of RuneScape. It's absolutely the lifeblood of RuneScape, and it's just bad from a marketing perspective. It really is. You know, and here's my little diatribe on this. You know, from a philosophical and a literary perspective, I really don't see the point in trying to chill the creation of FanWorks, lengthy or no. You know, like I said, works like that involve a lot of investment into the game and the lore.
Yep.
And I say this as somebody who has been writing fan fiction since 2013. Fanfic is a love letter. It's a love letter to some element of the work. You know, at worst, it's an entertaining supplement. At the best, it's increasing engagement to the original IP. You know, it's interpretive, it's transformative. And that kind of work, that kind of interpretation and transformation, it's as old as storytelling itself. You know, people did that back in the day before you wrote stuff down. You know, they would interpret and transform and, you know, insert their own characters into stories. And that's how stories have evolved. You know, to kind of quash this notion, to quash that under a very dubious claim of, you know, competition. I don't think it's a good thing at all.
Yeah.
You know, fan fiction, you know, it's not the greatest thing in the world. I think it's awesome, but, you know, I read things outside of fan fiction, you know, and I don't think that it's a 100% unproblematic, fantastic thing. You know, you get good fics, you get bad fics, you get middle of the road fics, but in and of itself, it is an act of creation. It is an act of creation. It is an act of love. And that in and of itself needs to be protected.
And that's what drives communities. And that's what drives communities on our side. So, okay.
So, and, you know, I know we have creative mods on Jagex who have been pushing against this. Again, they were very surprised at this. I send my endless appreciation to you in terms of that. And again, I hope it all, you know, has a happy ending. And I think it will.
Yeah.
Right.
Fingers crossed.
All
Maybe
right.
I'll be eating my words in a week.
I think at the end of the day, everybody wants what's best, right? Like, I think if there is an issue, you will also have pushback from within the company that will support you. And that is good that is a good feeling to have, right? To know that there are people in the company who do support you and want to have your back on this because they're with you on it.
Yeah. And, you know, just in summing this up, I see this as maybe this is something that was needed because of their acquisition of that company in the US, or maybe they're expecting some kind of expansion of the RuneScape IP, and they wanted to get something down regarding fan content creation policy. And as you mentioned, that disconnect between legal and the creators, that's what we're largely talking about in this segment. And there's lots of these little things that can, of course, be ironed out as we move through this. So, I think I'm good to leave that there. Is there anything you'd like to say, parting on that subject before we move on?
I mean, I just got to rant about copyright policy for about an hour, 45 minutes.
Okay.
I will say again, if anybody has any questions about this, please feel free to poke me on Twitter or on Discord. I love talking about this kind of thing, and please don't be afraid. Please keep on creating. Creating is good. You know, put it out there.
All right. One final note before we tackle a couple of listener questions. Double XP Live is coming back. They're calling it Summer Double XP between August 12th and 22nd. Pretty much the same as it was all the previous times, except now you can attack multiple combat dummies at one time. You can place 3 down at once, and they can be affected by AoE spells and abilities. And they also want to make them easier to play. So you're going to be raking in that combat XP on Double XP Live.
I missed that. It annoys the heck out of me that I had to use them one at a time. I've got a stack of way too many of those things. And honestly, I had separate bars saved on, especially my alt. I had entirely separate bars saved and like keybound saved so that I could flip to them easily for when I was doing those dummies, because so many abilities that are core to rotations do not work on those do not work on those dummies. So that's a great change. Good for them. Good QOL.
And you can also pick dummies up if you haven't gained any XP from them. That's another good one.
Oh shoot, I don't have time to do this 3-minute dummy. My raid team is actually leaving now. We filled faster than I could.
Oh, Mazcab raids.
Or
XP
whatever have you.
Yeah. Nick the
XP
Trader will also
brrr.
be back converting hours of double XP as well, just like last time. So August 12th through the 22nd. We'll have to see what the numbers look like on the community side for this one in terms of engagement. So, 2 questions this week. First one from Brightflex. What ability would you add to the game? Or what special attack would you add to the game? Or passive effect? It can be funny, or for balancing, it's your choice. Chaos, do you have any ideas on this?
Oh God. I'm gonna say this as being a non-merchanter. I have no idea.
Okay, fair. For me, I got to go back to the niche that's been missing in RuneScape since the very beginning, and it comes down to we'd actually need a PVM experience designed around this. Add support abilities. More than what we have with the Saren stuff, the Saren spells, and Saren prayers. I don't specifically know what they would be, but I would just love to see a suite of support abilities.
It's a really good point. I mean, I think if you look at our current suite of special attacks, passives, everything, almost all of it is, here, have X amount of extra damage. We don't have a whole lot of things that are ability altering. That was going to be my answer to a lot of this too.
Okay, so kind of like a morph ability, so that maybe your rapid fire would do something different, perhaps. Or
well, not even like, I mean, yes, but like alternative effects to things, right? Like we've got some really interesting stuff, like the limitless ability, right? That is obviously really expensive because it's decent, but in terms of like, they change some core fundamental about how the combat system works, or they interact with the game and your PvE opponent in a interesting kind of a way, where it's like, I think a good explanation of this is like, I think that it'd be really cool if they added in more like boss mechanics to things, right? Like the God books from the Elder God Wars, some of those are great examples, right? Where the Jas book gives you a like time dilation where they're pulling part of the effect in from that. And again, it's very damage focused, and I wish that there was something else that was like, if they could find some effects that are still impactful without just giving you extra damage, right? And there's like, it's a lot of different facets of extra damage, right? The Wen book, which is again a direct copy of the Glacier ability, is, just extra damage. But if they were to bring something in that, like, if you could shoot out a wall of flames like the QBD wall, or something else that has, I think that they could do a cool number of cool things with making stuff usable.
So basically special attacks plus is what you're saying.
Well, kind of, but just like, I think there's some inventive spaces, meaning that they've got all these boss effects, and those boss effects they can interact with things in a variety of different ways other than just doing damage, for the most part. And I think it would be really cool to give the players, in like coding appropriate way, access to some of those. Now, specific examples for that, kind of hard to say, right? Personally, I think, I hazard so hard to give. Melee has so many switches, and Magic has just a lot going on already. And as a ranged human, I would love to see stuff that takes more of the like a bow archetype,
right,
and kind of plunges that in. Either giving us, something that is like a special attack that is ammo that has some special, or not ammo, but acts as if you fired off a special shot or had done something interesting in a way that isn't already in the game. Again, sorry to not have super specifics on these, with Tannis being under the weather, I did get called in a little bit late. I did not have a whole bunch of chance to look over these in advance. Otherwise, maybe come back to me on this one in a future episode, and I'll have a better thought for you. Maybe that's something we could do as a monthly bit. Actually, even is looking into ways that we could diversify RuneScape's combat. Could be interesting. And I like the question, though.
And that's actually very interesting, because I actually just wrote that down as an idea.
Aha!
Because I feel like if it says design your own special attack, we've seen the absolute absurd with the Fractured Staff special attack, right?
Right.
Both when it was broken and how it is now. And
I mean, even with the new bow, if you were using a perfectly timed out rotation, truly perfectly, bow's real good. Just saying.
And when you throw in the right kind of arrows and whatnot too, the dyne arrows and such, that's another interesting thing that could be added on into that. But I think that's actually something really interesting that we could put our thinking hats on about and talk about in terms of what an expanded combat effect or some kind of different angle on. I don't even know what.
Pull the combat side and the gameplay side together again for a longer discussion. But
pull both those together for that. And I'm just going to come back to my support abilities, because that's something that, it's a play style that's missing, and it's a play style that I enjoy. Obviously, we'd need bosses that would require that, rather than just chonking out the most amount of damage that you can do in a minute. So
right. I'm not upset. Currently we have some supportive abilities, right? Things like the Statius Warhammer special attack. You need one person using that in a group boss instance. I think the same thing, if they, and I don't know what level you'd need to buff this to, but the Ruby Aurora spell, right? When they tried to create the support abilities, 5% extra damage doesn't make up for the sacrifice of having one person not using a air quotes real spell.
Right.
But if you buff that to a place where Ruby Aurora is really powerful now for a group buff, it doesn't increase your specific damage more than 5-10%, but it makes the group damage go up by more than 5%, which is what it currently is, or 3% is what it currently is. If that was 5 to 10, that might be something that you would just see everybody use it, just because it's a big buff.
Yeah. And that's the thing. The question is, I think we kill bosses fast enough now. I don't even know if that's needed in terms of...
it's certainly not necessary, but
right.
Something that people would optimize for. Because we're not talking about, if you're talking about having a support class, one, you're kind of implying group content, unfortunately.
Yep.
Its support classes historically have not been good solos in any game. It's just hard to design well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there are people who are going to see this and be in this other MMO, I love this soloing in the support class. But it's something that is designed for group content, which the game has trouble with already. People wanting to do solo things. I don't know. It has a place, and that place is group content, and group content does generally want to optimize for things, but it's just how do you make it optimized without introducing unhealthy or unnecessary power creep?
Precisely.
And maybe it's a cool reward space, right? It's a cool reward space that is only power creep at certain group situations, which could be really cool. That somebody's I'm excited to try this out, but I need a group to do it, right? And maybe I don't know.
Maybe.
I like the idea.
And maybe we're just trying to front load the cart here and try and make group content easier so we get more people doing raids, right?
Well, again, that'll be what it'll be. Jagex is abandoned, and the player base will be there if they want to be.
Yeah. Thank you, Bryflex. That was a very inspiring question, in the fact that it made both of us think of a potential monthly bit.
We may be revisiting this concept.
Next
and unlike Jagex, we will give you credit for taking the idea.
Yes, we will. We will. I'm actually going to write that down right now. I'm going to write that down right now. The next one is from Ricky A. With the upcoming economy changes, death cost reductions, and wilderness changes, do you think any of these updates will make items like the Fractured Staff or Codices more expensive or cheaper going forward? And along the same kind of lines, what are your all thoughts on the current prices for items, and what should be done if you do not agree with the prices?
Right. My personal opinion on this, to answer at least the second part of this first, the prices are too high. The items are not accessible for general players to use, And they're not, if the prices were, I think Mazcap codexes are a great example. It is an ability that you need to integrate into your rotation that may have some special or unique use. And in that case, you want to introduce pieces one piece at a time so the combat system isn't even more overwhelming than it already is. And I understand them being gated in that way. But having things that cost orders of magnitude larger money to upgrade from one tier to the next or to get any level upgrade is not healthy, in my opinion, for the game.
Yeah.
I am much of the opinion power creep will be what it will be. Give people access to the fun toys you've just released, right? How many people in the game have access to the new bow right now? It's not a very large percentage. And that will expand over time because people will continue to get drops, and that's right. Things are not getting pulled out of the economy, and they're not bound to your account in any way. So having really higher drop rates isn't feasible necessarily in an economic sense, but I do think that they are too rare right now, and that is leading to prices being higher than I would like them to be.
Yeah, and the key point of this is if you want a meta magic setup, that staff is multiple billions, and I don't think that's sustainable for anybody who wants to work for something like that.
Somebody can say, "Oh, you can make 100 mil an hour if you're endgame Telos," right? Well, okay, or even 30, 40 mil an hour if you're just grinding Ripper Demon pouches, those kind of things, right? But like then you think about how much 6 bill is in terms of that. That is what, like 300 hours to earn a staff?
Oh
like,
my god,
dog. Like. And people get crazy money by doing bosses that are a lot of money, but at the same time, like a lot of that requires finding groups or being very good, and it is limiting. So I dislike that. With regard to, do I think the prices will change? Excellent Mercher question. From a very reasonable Mercher perspective, the economy changes. I mean, if anything, it'll bump prices 1%, but I don't think that's going to be noticeable among normal fluctuations. If anything, it might pull prices down somewhat as gold leaves the game, although I don't expect that either.
No, and I mean, unless we have a bunch of staff pieces being hoarded by people, right. I don't see prices going up. I'd say just expect them to become more accessible through the exchange and maybe even go down a hair. That would be my guess where we're at right now.
From the economy side, death cost and wilderness changes wise, we don't have a strong idea yet of what they're doing with the wilderness. I would say if they do something like they've done with old school, where they have chucked like 9 bosses and just put them in the wildy and said, "Hey, go have fun." It's dangerous because there's big, 1 PKers and 2 big dangerous things. Anytime new bosses get released, PVM supplies generally go up. So that is both your consumables and things like that are account bound, like codexes or like a weapon that you're going to buy one of. Things generally increase if you put out mid to high tier PVM content that will use it. Death cost reduction is the other side of that to me, where they've shown during free death weeks that when they incentivize learning bosses, those bosses do get killed more significantly. And so if they really cheapen up the death cost, that could potentially increase the number of people willing to get into PVM, which I'm all for, and provide more supply or more demand. But generally speaking, more people doing PVM decreases the price of things.
Yeah.
Decreased death cost decreases the price of items because of supply. So
Chaos, how do you feel about the current state of the economy from some... I assume you're not a PVMer.
I am in no way, shape, or form a PVMer. I am a disgusting lore hound.
Let's go!
Yell at me all you wish.
No, we're not going to do that.
Nobody here is going to fault you for that whatsoever. I still have my master quest everywhere I can.
I am impressed by PVM. And what they're able to do there. I don't think I could do PVM on a point and click. Dark Souls, yes. Elden Ring, Bloodborne, all that jazz, yes. But when I'm clicking things, I just no.
How many keybinds can you manage at once?
God, I sound like such a grandma.
No. Even coming from other MMOs, our keybind system is disgusting.
Yeah,
truly.
It is really interesting to hear. The PVMers I know when they're on stream, fighting Zammy or Carapack or whatever, you just ticky-tacking away.
Yeah, the 200 APM dream. We're getting up to StarCraft levels in a game that is literally 100 ticks a second. You're performing multiple actions every 0.6 seconds. It's silly. It's actually silly.
Yeah. But how do you feel about the prices? Too high? Too low? You hope they go down? Up?
Whatever gets Reddit to stop being salty, which is probably something in the realm of absolute impossibility.
I agree with that statement. RuneScape players go and complain. Reddit players go and writers gonna complain. You put those two together, perfect storm of just sheer salt.
Oh,
rain and salt water.
Sodium poisoning. I follow two. I keep an eye on two PVMers. One of them is Enko, and that's because she's a friend of mine, and she's also an artist. The other one is Evil Lucario, and that is purely because he has stated he's written fan fiction in the past, and he specifically went out of his way to cheer on for me during the Gnome Noms in 2020. He's awesome. 10 out of 10.
Everybody likes Luca. I have not heard a whole lot of people saying, "Oh, Luca's a dingus. They don't like him for whatever reason." He just seems to be a generally wholesome human being.
I remember when he came into the RAC and he asked for a really expensive commission of, I think, a Blessed Flask water bottle, just like ludicrously expensive. He's like, that's what I want.
Yeah, he was on a tear for a while. I don't know if you remember, you got a wind of this at all. You probably did. Where he was trying to make 28 blessed flasks in his free time between PVM sessions. Like, bruh.
That was was an interesting grind, and we'll leave that there.
Vibes.
God bless him. God blessed flask him. He's a bro.
It does seem that that's the case.
All right. Well, let's start wrapping the show up then. Chaos, I believe you have a pick of the week for us. Yep.
So I'm sure everybody is very aware of a game with a cat that goes on adventures in a broken down, robot-ridden dystopia. This game is also, oddly enough, about a cat that goes on adventures in a robot-riddled dystopia. It is not Stray. It is one shot. If you have $10 to spare and, a few hours out of your life, a free evening, what have you, I highly recommend this game. It is a top-down RPG adventure. Very charming, great music, adorable characters. I believe it was made with RPG Maker, but the environments are anything but stock. It's just such a sweet little game. And if you enjoyed the storytelling elements from a lot of indie games out there like Undertale, Deltarune, so on and so forth, you will absolutely love this game. Sister recommended it to me. I sat down and I played it, in a couple of goes. But you can, again, play it as in the name, one shot. It's just really charming and cute and not that expensive.
Nice, and that's available on Steam, of course.
Yes.
And it's so nice when you see Steam games that are both Windows and Mac. I just wanted to point that out. So,
mood.
Alrighty, we do have some achievements this week. We're going to start us off with Swaboosh, who got 99 Invention on July 26th. Skips got 99 Thieving on the 25th. Azadia got 99 Invention on the 24th, as well as Battle/X, who also got 99 Prayer on the 24th.
On the 24th, continuing, we had Kexi getting 120 Dungeoneering, Luminos getting 120 Archaeology, and Exploited One getting 99 Summoning. On the 23rd, we had Arov getting 120 Defense, and Donna getting 99 Dungeoneering.
Well done.
And we send a congratulations to Lady Claw, who got 120 Fire Making on July 23rd, Azhadia, who got 99 Arc on July 22nd, Skips, who got 99 Smithing and 99 Attack, both on July 22nd. And finally, Tim2, who got 120 Rune Crafting on July 21st. That's a lot of Tears of Guthix.
Congratulations, everybody.
Yeah, run 20 Rune Crafting. Oof. Not something I personally want to think
that's
of.
grind. I hope he's not hunting pet.
Yeah. Yeah. Alrighty. We're going to talk a bit about what we've been up to on RS. I'll start with this one. This week, primarily, I've just been spending the last, I guess, few days at the beach, I guess, because I think that's going away this coming Monday. So I just wanted to put some time in there, get some free construction XP, because I've been told that I probably should have done the dungeoneering hole for the pet, but I actually didn't do that for that. Maybe I should have done that, but...
Shane, you've spent far too much time in that hole. It's okay.
Step into the loathsome dung hole.
Yeah, last year I went from like 115 to 118 at the hole.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. It's not one of my favorite skills. And as it is right now, I see one of my green dot friends there in the hole right now. I can't tell which one it is though.
Amazing.
Okay, it's Alex43. But aside from that, just dailies and raids when I can get them in. But how about you, Cass?
I've actually been hitting up OSRS. I found out about the HDOS client. Tweeted about it recently on the topic of fan projects. And if you come from the 2008 scape, when you were hitting up, RuneScape just before, or just after the OSRS graphics, but just before the evolution of combat, kind of that sweet spot. It's just perfect. It's beautiful. I've been doing quest runs. They have the 2008 version of Autumn Voyage on there. I wanted to cry from nostalgia. It's beautiful. They're constantly updating it. I recommend giving it a check out if you played RuneScape during the majority of that era. I did, HD RuneScape 2, which I thought, was forever lost, but it's not anymore, and I am a happy clam.
I remember logging in when we got those HD graphics, and it just blew me away.
I know. God, it definitely
we were coming
hit it up.
from this tiny, tiny square screen, and then bam, we got a resizable window and such. So... I can understand that, definitely. Personally, I've been looking at the old school news side as well. They've been doing some interesting things on that, but it's just something I always try and keep my ear on, just in case they manage to pull anything interesting out of that. So I can 100% side with you on that. How about you, Thaxi?
They have
sorry, continue.
Oh,
if you're not.
No, they have Tombs of a Mascot coming out later in August, so new raids, new stuff happening.
And I think what Shane was talking about too, they had a poll going on in terms of what people wanted in terms of length and variety and potential new game modes. And one of those is a true 2007 experience.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
In terms of what I've been up to, I was away for a large part of the weekend, and so I have not, this week in RuneScape, I have been, I'm prepping to move myself and go off to school and do all these things, so I've been busy. But this week I did finally get the Sentistan Asylum key. I'm close to 1,000 kills in. I've done almost a month worth of Slayer assignments with the Mask Force. But I did finally get the key, so I am now I have reclaimed my comp cape and trim comp, and I am currently just chilling at in Aya.
Oh, I thought you were going to say the hole.
No. Once I get my Aya stuff done, I'll have my quest cape back. Okay. My master quest cape. So I'll have all my achievement capes back, which is remarkable given the length of time, the volume of time I've been playing the game recently.
Yeah.
But that I still have capes. But I'll take it. So it's been a good week so far.
Nice. You spent forever getting that key.
I spent a long time at Abyssal Lords. I did.
Longer than you should have, I think.
I think I got the soul and the book at less than half the KC it took me to get the key, and the key is supposed to be the most common drop. But
yeah,
can't complain.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. RNG do be like that.
Yep. Alrighty, well, I think that's it for this episode of Update. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Chaos, for enlightening us on our copyright situation in RuneScape. Fingers crossed that everything will turn out well at the end of the day.
Fingers crossed.
Yep.
Thank you for allowing me on and letting me yammer.
Of course. And If you want this podcast delivered automatically to you, subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Amazon, Pocket Cast, Stitcher, YouTube at youtube.com/RSBANDB. But if you just want any of those other services, update.show/subscribe. And please do leave us a like on the YouTube channel and subscribe if you're so willing. It greatly helps the channel out. We had a wonderful discussion in the comments this week on our grand exchange tax bit from last week, which was, I honestly didn't expect that to get that much traction, but it did. So you guys enjoyed that one, and you also enjoyed the discussion on the Malie robes, oddly enough. So thank you so much for everything on the YouTube channel, but of course, youtube.com/RSBANDB for more of that. And with that being said, we'll be back next week for another episode of RSBANDB Update. We'll see you then, everybody. Take care. Have a good weekend.
Ciao.
Bye.